Welcome to the Foul Play YouTube channel.
Well, good morning, beautiful people. It's good to be back with Coffee with Foul Play, and we're continuing our series today. Let's follow the evidence, and I believe we're on part 3 already, believe it or not. My name is Dr. Silkman, and I love to welcome all of our listeners to our podcast. And it's good to be here. Let me just let me mute my iPad. It's great to be here, and I'd like to welcome all our listeners and our new listeners to the podcast. And believe it or not, we have hit 352 subscribers, which is fantastic. And our videos and podcasts have had over 22,000 views, which is really, really unbelievable. And guys, this morning, and it is morning for me, believe it or not, for the very first time, I'd like to welcome my fellow panelists. And joining me today on our podcast are Bibi, Big Jeff, Christy, Lily, Neverly, Patty Scissors Hands, Zoe, and Sammy. And both Lily and Sammy will be checking the chat. And of course, guys, we welcome all of your questions. And both Lily and Sammy will alert us during the podcast if there are some questions that need answering, and we'll try our very best. And if we don't answer all the questions, we'll definitely check them out during the podcast. All right, guys, look, welcome everyone. There's just a few little things that I like to say. Please, if you enjoy our podcast, support us by subscribing to our channel. I think you've got the general hint now that we've got a lot of very passionate and lovely people here who are very passionate about the cases involving both Stephen and Brendan. And our collective aim is to see justice, not justice for the boys, but also proper justice for the victim, in this case, Teresa Halbach, whatever your theory is. And of course, please, if you get a chance, check out Billy's excellent YouTube channel. He can't join us, unfortunately, today. He's done a lot of fantastic work. And just a couple of things. We've also started a new podcast series known or referred to as Thirsty for Theory Thursday. And I believe our very first one was done by Big Jeff, and it was really, really, really good. And of course, in this particular type of game, a lot of things happen within a week. And a member has been able to FOIA a lot of the phone calls, and I believe that Foul Play has uploaded about 115 phone calls. And Christy, do you have a minute or so to give us a brief overview of those phone calls? What were they all about, Christy?
Well, there's 115 of them. It's roughly, I haven't added it up, but it's probably close to 100 hours of listening.
Oh.
There's really not too much that we didn't already know.
Yes.
I know there's some people who are taking very big notes and really combing through these, but really, I mean, there's a lot of, you see how you hear the astonishment or the general shock, the genuine shock in Stephen's voice when he hears that they found his blood in the vehicle.
Yes.
I mean, there's just a lot of, he's worried. And I mean, it's heartbreaking to listen to some of these. He tries to talk to Jodi. He's really concerned about Jodi. He just doesn't sound like a man who's guilty of killing this woman at this time. He really doesn't. And it's not really it's really not about what is said in the calls. It's almost more about what we don't hear in them, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
Just really fast. The original FOIA was done by a researcher named Kaboom Bam Zoom. And you can find him.
You did that perfectly.
I messed that up so badly on Thursday.
Yes.
But you can find
Yeah.
him on Millbilly's Discord, or you can find
Fantastic.
him on other Discord channels and
Fantastic.
and talk away. Yep.
Thank you, Big Jeff. And Christy, would you like to continue?
Yeah, I mean, the one I heard Ken Kratz might possibly be watching us on our fall play. It's a rumor. It hasn't been confirmed. I'm not sure, but we did hear this.
Wow.
So in light of these phone calls, I mean, I would like to just tell Mr. Kratz that he did an amazing job as a prosecutor, because I mean,
Yes.
please sense my sarcasm. You know, I would love to have him come here and talk to us and have an actual adult conversation. I mean, we're not. I would not attack him. I would be an adult. I don't know. I would just love him to come here and talk to us and explain this to us, because there's a lot.
Yes.
There's a lot more questions now. A lot more.
Well, first of all, just echoing what Big Jeff said. Thank you very much, Christy. Echoing what Big Jeff said, for the member who FOIA'd those phone calls, that's fantastic. And it goes to show people's real passion, and we're learning new stuff all the time. I haven't listened to all the phone calls, just a few myself, but yes, you're correct. It is very, very tragic. And Stephen is completely clueless as to what happened to him. So it's very, very telling. And of course, look, Mr. Kenneth Kratz, both you and your wife, you're most welcome to join our foul play. Just bring yourself a cup of coffee, and we would love to have you as a guest on our show. And I'm sure our listeners would enjoy that as well. So you're most welcome. So guys, do we have any quick comments before we start the podcast proper? Anyone want to say any comments? Okay, we're all good. We're all set to go. Fantastic. Well, look, guys, welcome. What we're going to do today, we're going to start at slide 119, which is where we left off before. So we really don't have to spend too much time here. So really, this was another interrogation session of Brendan with both Wiegert and Fassbender questioning him again and getting another statement. And what you notice here, of course, is the complete absence of his attorney, Mr. Meow Meow Len Kaczynski, who was not present during one of these interrogation sessions. And it's really bad. And just very quickly, for those who've actually heard this interrogation session, you can see Brendan's demeanor, which is exactly how he used to be in all the interrogation sessions, head down, not looking at anybody. But the remarkable thing about this interrogation session is that he started to recant some of the major things that he said earlier. And it got so bad that the investigators kept on looking at each other thinking, uh-oh, why is this kid suddenly changing his mind on all these things that he said before? And Fassbender says to him, so you brought us here so you can lie to us? And it's remarkable that Brendan, often in the same interrogation, completely flipped what he told the investigators. And really, when you think about it, these are meant to be two mature investigators. Surely they could have seen that this young child had no credibility in what he was saying. Guys, do we have any quick comments about that? Anybody? Big Jeff, what would you like to say?
Well, they kind of treated Brendan. If you look at the way events unfolded for him, he was interviewed in Crivets on the 6th, and he told various stories as he went, and nothing continued. Things didn't happen to him for a while, right? His first couple of interviews, he wasn't immediately arrested, so he was telling me stories. Fassbender will tell him, you got to tell us, it'll be okay. And at some point, it had to hit him the seriousness of what they were going to do to him. They've taken him into custody all of a sudden. So he's kind of getting the message that perhaps that they're not It's
Yes.
not going to be okay. So maybe it is time to recant some of the stuff that I said. It's not surprising, given
Yes.
his mentality that he played along, but then, oh my God, when it hit the fan, he got the
Yes.
message that it was time to do something about it. So,
Do you think he understood the seriousness when they put handcuffs on him and he couldn't actually go back to school? Yes, Big
that's
Jeff.
about the time I think. I think that's about the time that he did figure it out, because when they first said he was under arrest, he said, "What, for one day?"
Yes, correct. That reveals the entire tragedy of the situation. He started to recant, and the amazing thing is, he recanted the story about the cutting of the hair, right, which is remarkable. And he had a conversation with Fassbender saying, "Where did you get the knife from?" Bibi, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just real quick on the hair. Funny how they never ask him how they cut her hair, if
Yes.
if they used
Yes.
scissors, used a knife or anything.
Yes, and basically, whatever he was saying, it just couldn't support. Nothing could be corroborated at all. And guys, when you think about it, if Brendan is pulling these facts from a story, from a film, from a book, or whatever, of course, it's not going to be supported by any type of hard physical evidence. To me, what is remarkable is that the investigators had the power to say, "Guys, this kid knows nothing." But they knew that they could not let Brendan go. And that's the tragedy of the entire scenario, the entire court case. They could not let him go. Christy, did you have a comment?
No, not at all.
Okay, beautiful. All right, guys. So clearly, Brendan's attorney was not present. I think he had to go away on some type of military duty. But really, when you think about it, Neville, do you have a comment?
Yeah, exactly. You kind of read my mind. I wanted to say that you can tell that Kaczynski wasn't there. And
Yes.
who threw him to the wolves? Michael O'Kelly.
Oh, yeah. That's a
Remember
very,
that?
very good point. Oh, yeah. We're going to be we're going to be covering Michael O'Kelly in
Oh,
future
yeah.
slides. Look, everything was badly set up for Brendan from the beginning. And he was set up to fail. And that's why now, with the benefit of hindsight, we can go back and we can have a look. And that's the power of what we are doing as a family here, looking at the podcast, because we can actually see it unfold in real time. All right, guys. So if there are no further comments on slide 119, we can actually commence our podcast proper. And lo and behold, if we have a look at slide 120, it just happens to be about phone calls. Now, it's remarkable that Chuck handed Jodi the telephone bills, the call and the call log. And when Jodi looked at them, she discovered that she, in actual fact, had made 2 phone calls to Stephen on the 31st of October 2005. Now, what's remarkable here is that Ken Kratz had come up with this hypothesis or theory with nothing to back it up, that basically, according to Brendan, Teresa Halbach was chained or shackled to a bed inside Stephen's bedroom, and they had committed rape, assault, all these horrendous, horrible crimes. But it later came out that Jodi, who is Stephen's fiance, had phoned Stephen up twice, once at 5:36 and at the other time 8:57. And I'll just read it out for our listeners. At 5:36 p.m. on the day of the alleged rape and murder, Jodi called Stephen from the Manitowoc County Jail, because remember, she was in prison for a DUI offense, where she was serving time for a DUI. And all the calls, and that's hence what we're listening to now, all the calls from the jail are recorded and they're time stamped. Furthermore, Jodi called back at 8:57 p.m. on the day of the alleged rape and murder. And what became pretty obvious, and guys, I think Zoe will put the links in the podcast notes for you to go and have a listen to those 2 calls. What strikes you is that the conversations are normal between a fiance and her partner. There's nothing nefarious. There are no noises in the background of a screaming Teresa Halbach or any indication that any type of event has taken place. Guys, do we have any quick comments about the phone calls? Big Jeff.
So, a couple of interesting things. One is that there are phone calls that they actually refuse to release. People have attempted to FOIA them,
Yes.
and the state has said no, we're not going to release them.
Yes.
Wouldn't you know it that some of those calls are actually from before the 31st of October between Stephen and Jodi? Why do you suppose that is?
Yeah.
Could it be that perhaps they were talking about maybe he was going to burn the brush, and he was going to have Brendan over, invite a few friends over, or something like that?
Correct.
I wonder what those calls could have been about. And there's also one on the 3rd of November that many researchers, including our friend Millbilly, is very anxious to get his hands on. Again, people with nothing to hide don't continue to hide things. Why should it be that these calls aren't released? Why?
Yes, that is correct. Bibi, do you have a quick comment?
Yes. Well, according to the new phone calls that we do have, Stephen talks to his mom about how he let Jodi know in advance that he was going to be calling on Monday to have Teresa come out and photograph the van. So the police definitely did have access to that information days beforehand.
Which is very interesting, of course. Christy, do you have a quick comment?
Well, Bibi beat me to one of the things that I was going to say, and I just wanted to agree with Jeff too on the. I just learned the other day that there was calls prior to the day Teresa was there that were refusing to be released, and that just, to me, I mean, that just gives us more reason to be suspicious and more reason to say that they were doing something they shouldn't have been doing. Because why not? Why not really? How is a call from before she was missing relevant to? Maybe they have the call where he's admitting that this is going to be his plan. I mean, I don't know. That's the only thing, I mean, unless he's confessing in an earlier phone call, but you think that would have come out somewhere.
That would have been front page news. Zoe, do you have a quick comment?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing on the phone call from October 21st at 8:15, 8 p.m. was that Stephen was complaining about Barb, how she's not home, that she's out all the time, and she comes home for 5 minutes and then she's gone again, and stuff like that. And at about 9 p.m. and 10 minutes, like 9 and 10, I don't know how you say that. But at that time, 10 past 9. So at that mark, Stephen says, "Oh, she's leaving again." So that's important because Barb said she was at Scott's place and that they were watching Prison Break together. So that was not true.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, Zoe. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
I do. That was a time when it was supposedly in the middle of all this. Barb does not talk about a fire that she saw that was raging. She does not talk about a foul smell. There's nothing suspicious that she's seen. As a matter of fact, in the calls that were recently released, Stephen and Barb are talking to try and figure out what actual day that Stephen burned Redant's brush. And they finally come out that it was Halloween, but certainly the bill of materials regarding what they burned, not enough to destroy a human body.
Oh God, no. And you see, the thing is that if I could just make a comment, the reason why the state wants to suppress all the phone calls beforehand and some after is because there was no plan to murder someone. Right? There was no plan to lure someone to the Avery salvage yard in order to entrap them, to kill them, to dismember them, and to burn them. There was nothing. And from what from the phone calls that I've listened to, someone had made the comment. In fact, it's Ronald Cass, that he's listened to 76 calls, and there's very, very little mention of Brendan, and that says a lot. Sammy, do you have a quick comment?
Yeah, Obi on here mentioned, are those calls considered part of the sealed evidence? So are there such calls?
Well, they weren't obviously released the first time round. They had to be FOIA. So, Zoe, do you have a comment?
Yes, some of them are considered of being sealed.
Okay. All right. So, normally what happens if something is... Oh, Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I did want to take just a second to make it clear that there are some calls that exist between Jodi, who was at a different place. She was in jail.
Yes.
But and these calls that were recently released are Stephen's calls right after he was arrested on the 9th. They go from the 9th,
Yes,
to the 18th or something like that, Zoe. And just to be clear that we are talking about two different sources of calls from different prisons.
Correct.
They go from November 10th to November 29th.
Right. Okay, when Stephen was in prison. Yeah. So, the calls which are very telling are the ones before the 31st of October. So clearly there was no nefarious plan by Stephen. 31st of October would have been considered a normal, boring day. Nothing out of the ordinary as far as Stephen went. And if you listen to the two calls between Stephen and Jodi, you can clearly see and hear that there was nothing going on in the background, right? There was nothing nefarious, no murder, no rape, no nothing. Neverly, do you have a comment?
Yes, I would like just to highlight the lack of reporting of any smell, any unusual activities with all the people that live on the compound, every compound, and all the
Yes.
people that are coming and going, being Halloween, and Blaine being picked up by his boss. So it's not just the Averys and the Dasses, it's other people that are there. And
Yes.
we are to believe that Teresa was burnt there in front of his house, and Stephen's house is the first one to come by down the Avery Road, correct?
Well,
And
it's actually at the
nobody
back. It's actually at the
at the
back,
back.
Neverly.
Well,
It's actually
yes,
at the back. But you're correct. No one had reported.
nothing. And that smell,
Yeah,
from what I heard, is just
it
unmistakable
is
and
extremely distinct.
unforgettable. Yes.
Correct. Anyone that's witnessed a burning body, a rescue team, and people like that, even people, some of the funeral rites where they openly burn bodies, it is an unmistakable smell. And don't forget, the Dassey residence was not too far away from Stephen's trailer. And yes, people were coming and going. You're correct. No one had reported a foul smell or a distinct odor. But the important thing here, guys, is that we are deconstructing the state's narrative. And the remarkable thing is, it's the phone calls which are doing that. So we know from 5:36 and for 15 minutes, and from 8:57 and for 15 minutes, nothing took place because you can't hear anything, and the voice of Stephen is normal. He's talking normal chit chat with his fiance. So, guys, it's important for our listeners. Yes, Neverly, do you have a comment?
He's even being playful with his girlfriend, fiance.
Correct.
He wasn't breathing heavily. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't edgy, anything. He was being playful.
Yes. In other words, he was being completely normal. Christy, do you have a comment?
Yes, Millbilly and I were speaking the other night, and he had told me something that I didn't know. In addition to that, so Stephen supposedly killed her and did all of this on Monday night. On Tuesday, November 1st, he goes to the jail to see Jodi. I don't know about you, but I seem to think that if I had just committed a murder, I think the last place I would want to be standing is in a police station.
with all the police officers around him, for sure.
I'm just saying.
Of course. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
Yeah, maybe Ken Kratz needs to change his story based on that information that he only had 4.5 days to clean up, not 5.
Yes. BB, do you have a comment?
Well, yes, and not only having committed a murder and being in a police station, he just also raped a girl, supposedly, and then killed and mutilated her. And he's facing his fiancée.
Correct. And Jodi didn't note anything nasty or nefarious going on. It was just a normal chit chat between Jodi and Stephen. And don't forget, guys, also Brendan got up in the morning, kissed his mum, and went to school. And Ken Kratz came up with this incredible hypothesis and storyline that, Brendan was encouraged to commit the rape and assault and to help place Teresa on a bed. I mean, think about it, guys. He's a 16-year-old kid and he's committed the most horrendous and heinous of crimes. What does he do? He goes home, kisses his mum, watches a bit of TV, goes to bed, wakes up in the morning as though nothing has happened. That's pretty remarkable. And we must reflect, right? We must reflect, how on earth did the judge and the jury buy this scenario? But remember, guys, 7 of the jurors said not guilty. 7. And then something happened where they all changed their mind. So at least 7 were able to clearly see that the state's narrative could not have possibly been the way it was. Bibi, do you have a comment?
Well, in Steve's jury pool, there was members of the police department and also employees' spouses of the courthouse, and so it was very stacked. It had at least 3 or 4 people that shouldn't have been there.
Yeah, and also one gentleman had to leave because of some horrendous accident that didn't turn out to be so bad after all. And it's interesting how they interviewed this gentleman, and we'll see him later on in our podcast, how he had a lot of doubt. He basically said, where is the blood? Where is the DNA? And I reckon that a lot of the jurors would have been asking the same type of questions, which is really remarkable. So guys, Christy, do you have any comments?
Well, you said we would talk about him later. I was just going to say that makes it very, the car accident happening when it did made it very, very suspicious. And if you do that math with those numbers you just said, once they got rid of him, we had 3 or 4 that we feel were planted in there as jurors. And then you had the majority thinking he was innocent. So maybe they knew that they could switch those 7, but he was the one holdout, and they knew that he was the one that needed to go.
Yes, there's no doubt about that. Apparently, he stated that there was, I think, 3 that were firm in his guilt, and they wouldn't budge, they wouldn't move. And then we had the incident where I believe it was Remiker who invited people to serve pizza, and Lord knows whether they had actually listening devices in the courtroom where the jurors were. Big Jeff, do you have a quick comment?
I was just going to confirm the fact that it was Remiker that did that. He was reprimanded for it somehow.
Yep. Yes, he was.
But just think about, you're sitting there, and let's say you're an honest and open-minded juror. Avery's defense is that the police planted evidence. How comfortable would you feel openly talking about the police planting evidence as a uniformed police officer serving you pizza at 9 o'clock at night?
Well, that's correct.
Oh yeah,
that's correct. Neverly,
it's just they got no business.
It would have been very uncomfortable. Neverly. Yeah, Neverly.
Pagel also visited the restaurant where all the jurors had dinner one night, and somebody said, well, can we have an alcoholic drink? So instead of calling Pagel to confirm yes or no, he chose to show up at the dinner place and sat with them.
Yeah.
Nothing suspicious there.
Yeah, not only not only that, but it's highly inappropriate. And if
Inappropriate, yeah. I don't think
yes,
the policy states there.
no, and the thing is, right, if you've got a county, a relatively small county, and Bibi hopefully will back me up on this, most people will tend to know the general law enforcement. And so then if they're right in front of you, you're going to be fairly nervous. Bibi.
Yeah, good, bad, or indifferent. You're going to know
Yeah.
which officers gave you a hard time or pulled you over on some
Yes.
simple little bull and gave you a hard time and not,
Correct. Correct.
Yes.
Zoe, thank you, Bibi. Zoe, do you have a comment?
Well, about the Stevens jurors. Well, I was working on them for a little bit, and then I got a lot of information from Mystic Jinx.
Yes.
And there was one juror that was friends with Scott Taddick on Facebook and his brother, and they attended the same high school 1 year apart.
Yes.
There was one juror that went to Brendan Dessie's trial to get information later.
Yes.
One other juror, his father had the job Gene Cush had before he was hired as chief deputy.
Yes.
From another juror, well, his wife, she was brought out of retirement in October 2006, and she
Yes.
worked in the
Yes.
courthouse. The other sheriff was a volunteer sheriff, and he and his son work for MTSO.
Yes.
So yeah, and one juror, she was a alternative juror. She gave in a different case. Apparently, she was
Yeah.
a juror or something. She awarded Remiker with
Yes.
$172,000.
Yes. Compensation.
Yes.
Correct. In a case.
So,
Correct.
so it was a really nice
It was.
jury
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, that's correct. And guys, when we look at this in a very deep level, what we find is that almost everyone is related to somebody who happens to know someone in the MTSO. And I remember Dean Strang and Jerome Buting, they get all the pieces of paper where they questionnaire the potential jury pool, and I think it was 116 of them said, "Yeah, look, we heard about it on the news, we heard about the press conference, and we think Stephen's guilty." And this is before the trial even began. So, hence, you've got a contaminated jury pool, and the remarkable thing is, Ken Kratz in his book, and Christy will back me up in this, he said the one thing he regretted, the only thing he regretted was doing that press conference on March the 2nd. But it had the desired effect. It basically had polluted the jury pool, and they had this concept in their minds of how much of an evil monster Stephen Avery was, and of course his nephew, Brendan Dassey. And this had disastrous consequences for their particular trials. All right, guys. Well, that's slide 120. I think now, guys, we can move on to slide 121. Now, this was absolutely remarkable. I honestly sometimes think that the law enforcement officers in Wisconsin have got really no filter at all, because a news crew team had talked to Peterson about obviously the cases that were going. And he openly admitted, in fact, he even had a smirk on his face regarding, he knew about the planting allegation. And he nonchalantly said, well, they have to prove it. And then he made the remarkable comment that if they wanted to get rid of Stephen, it would have been easier just to kill him. Now we're talking about a law enforcement officer. Christy, do you have a quick comment?
I feel like when in my opinion, some of these people had a little football huddle and got together to decide what they were going to
Yeah.
plant and whatnot. And I almost feel like he's almost like the sore loser here, like where he says easier just to kill him. Like that was his
Yes.
vote and he got ruled out. Who says that? And he's not like a low level police officer.
Oh, no.
And he says it would have been just easier to kill him. Who says that?
And I agree with what you said, Christy. I believe that's exactly what happened. The godfathers of the MTSO got together, hatched a plan, and I reckon Peterson says, give him a lead sandwich. And the others go, well, that'll look rather a bit too obvious. We better try something else. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
I do. I'm not sure when the first time that Peterson said that was, but for sure he said that on the Dr. Phil show.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Which was obviously well after the trial, right? After Mann. Can you imagine saying that on national television? It would have been easier just to kill him.
Correct. Neville, do you have a comment?
Yes, but before he said it would be easier just to kill him, he also said, if we want, and I quote, if we wanted him out of the picture, like in prison,
yes,
or kill him. So there you go.
Correct.
He's in prison.
Yes, correct. The scary thing is that he was giving the subtle hint that if we need to take somebody out, whether they're in jail or out of jail, it's easy to do. And that's remarkable considering his position in the MTSO. Bibi, do you have a quick comment?
Yeah, as he says that, it makes me think that he found out the planting and timing of the planting and the warrants and everything very strenuous. So that's why he says it would be easier.
Well,
just saying.
Yes, and Neville, do you have a comment?
Peterson also said that his detectives worked by the book.
Of course they work by the book.
Come on.
What if you in Fleming's books?
Which book? Yeah.
I was thinking they used Ken Kratz's book, and maybe it was written ahead of time. Maybe the book was written way before it was actually released, and they used Ken Kratz's book to work off of, because that's the only book that they could have possibly followed.
Yes. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I'd invite our listeners to look up, Google the following phrase: "What is Title IX authority?" and ask ourselves whether or not the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office has, or the Calumet County Sheriff's Office has Title IX authority, which is the authority to kill people, like the U.S. Army has.
Yeah, well, the remarkable thing is that this is not the only case in which individuals or suspects or whatever have been killed by police officers, and the cover-up immediately begins. And I remember there was a case, I think Lily brought it to our attention, in which the police officers had stopped this man almost in front of his house, and they arrested him, they threw him on the hood, I believe, of his own car, and one officer panicked because he believed that the suspect was reaching for the officer's gun, which he wasn't, of course, and they called another officer who shot him point blank in the head and killed him instantly. And then the cover-up began. And the remarkable thing is that when they did the autopsy, the story did not match the bullet wound. And then it became obvious that they killed him intentionally. And that's why it's actually quite chilling when Peterson goes, it would have just been easy to kill him. And I reckon that Peterson was probably upset that, hey guys, why go through this whole planting scenario? Just put a bullet in his head, end the civil lawsuit. But maybe the family could have taken on the civil lawsuit. So in the end, it would have been better to frame him, unless, of course, they were going for a double whammy. Frame him, take him out. That was always a possibility. All right, guys, just to continue. Now, you think about this, right? You've got Strang, who went through all that footage and was watching Peterson make all these inflammatory comments, and there's Jodi sitting with him. And what does What does Strang say? This is insane. Where do you start? So quite clearly, as an attorney for Stephen, even he was disturbed and perturbed by what a law enforcement officer was openly saying on television. Guys, do we have any quick comments? Big Jeff.
My quick comment is, this is something that I learned from the videos.
Yes.
Sorry, the phone calls that were just released, was that Dean Strang was actually a law partner of Stephen Glynn. For some reason, I was left with the impression from Ma'am that he was some high-profile attorney elsewhere, and that he was identified. But he actually was just somebody's law partner of the attorney that was
part of the civil
given
lawsuit.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Yes, and the civil lawsuit lawyers actually had recommended Strang and Buting to Stephen, and so that's quite remarkable. All right then, guys. So quite clearly, the MTSO had an open hatred for Stephen and his family, and they couldn't actually disguise it or hide it. They were very open in that vitriol against him. And I agree. I believe that there was a plan in place the moment he stepped out of prison. Now, whatever that was, whether it was going to be a drug sting, a form of sexual molestation, or whatever, clearly they had to get him back into prison, right? So whatever plan that they were hatching, they were definitely hatching something. And these guys openly expressed that, all right? Now, do you think Peterson would have openly said this about any prisoner who's in jail? No, he made this comment specifically about Stephen, which is rather remarkable. Guys, let's have a look at slide 122. Well, I think this is probably Judge Willis's best piece of work that he did, and I'll read it out for our listeners. Judge Willis excludes the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department from any involvement in Stephen's upcoming trial, and the trial will be held in neighboring Calumet County. Now, Christy, do you have a quick comment?
No, let Jeff go first.
Okay, Big Jeff.
Yeah, Krista, you know that Jeff doesn't shut up, so you should have took your chance while you had it. So the question I have for the listeners is, why did he have to do that? Because they were already, for conflict of interest reasons, excluded. Yes. So why did he have to do that? And the reason is because they violated the conflict of interest in the first place. That's why they had to do it. That's why he had to do it.
Correct. But you have to admit, Big Jeff, and our listeners know as well, that the damage had been done, already had been done. Christy, do you have a comment?
Yeah, it was pretty much right along with what Jeff said. I mean, they were already involved. They were involved from minute one. They were supposed to not be involved from minute one, and they were involved from minute 1.2. I mean, they were right there. They were called in because Calumet couldn't handle it. Well, if Calumet couldn't handle it, why was it assigned to Calumet? And if Manitowoc wasn't doing it because of the conflict of interest, and you had Calumet do it, and Calumet needed help, why not call in a different county? Why Manitowoc?
Yep. Christy and everyone else, I think it's pretty obvious. Judge Willis, this was more like a token effort. It was more like, okay, the horse is bolted, make sure you shut the gate. Oh, by the way, all the horses are out. As a judge, I've got to be seen doing something, right? And it's remarkable that if you read the testimonies and you watch Ma'am, despite the fact that none of the Manitowoc County officers should have been on the Avery salvage yard, each person, each investigator gave a form of justification. And when they were questioned, hey, did you see a conflict here? No, I didn't. We needed the help, and they provided only some help. Yet, if you have a look at the discovery of all the damaging physical evidence in this case, who are the main players? You've got Lenk and Colburn, Remaker. Those three are everywhere. And those three should not have been anywhere near the Avery salvage yard because of the civil lawsuit. And it's remarkable that despite the fact that they were on the Avery salvage yard, despite the fact that they were involved in the discovery of all the major pieces of evidence against Stephen, that the judge allowed their discoveries to stand, right? And guys, let's not forget, item FL was found months after Brendan had confessed, months after Stephen was put in prison. And so why is Lenk and Remika doing at the garage for the discovery of the bullet? So in other words, it really was a sham. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
Well, wasn't Remaker Calumet? I'm kind of...
Not that I'm aware. I think it was
okay, very good.
I think it was part of Manitowoc as well. And that's why they were continuously being questioned what their presence, why they were there at the Avery salvage yard. And it was really funny, and it was a comedic moment, Big Jeff, when Buting had to stand in front of his client, Stephen, and tap him on the shoulder and say, excuse me, guys, but he's the one that's doing the civil lawsuit. What are you guys doing in his trailer, in his garage? And they didn't care. They did not care. They just said, well, we lent a hand, which is, really, really nefarious, crazy. Guys, do we have any comments about that? All right. So the judge gave a token effort and says, look, we're going to go to another county, but really all the damage has been done. So if we have a look at slide 123, now remember, there are two cases going on at almost at the same time, and that is Brendan Dassey. Brendan Dassey, unfortunately, walked into the bear trap himself. And he was legally represented by Len Meow Meow Kaczynski, and the judge was Jerome Fox. And it is remarkable that another attorney, another completely different attorney, Dean Strang, who's Stephen's attorney, said the following comment, and I'll read it for our audience. Stephen, because the impression was that Len gave was that Stephen was trying to get rid of Len Kaczynski. He was trying to get involved in Brendan's case, and that clearly was not the case. And so Dean Strang said, Stephen Avery is not orchestrating a campaign to get rid of Brendan Dassey's lawyer. My own sense is that the whole Dassey and Avery family is hoping that the current lawyer or some lawyer will simply defend Brendan Dassey. And that's remarkable. Guys, do we have any comments about that one? A big Jeff.
Where do you even start? Len Kaczynski, whether I think the real question here is, was Len acting out of his own, out of his own volition, or whether what was he actually taking orders from Kratz in the state? Because his plan from the beginning was to cop a plea. And Brendan clearly did not want to do that because he was declaring his innocence. But Len marched down that with Neverly's boyfriend Michael Kelly down that path. Isn't that right, Neverly?
Oh, that hurt.
Yes, it did. It did. Look, there's no doubt. I mean, we've got the benefit of hindsight now, so we can actually see what actually took place. Len Kaczynski and his right-hand man, Michael O'Kelly, they had a plan. They had a plan from the beginning, and that is, and Len openly said this on television, that Stephen was the devil incarnate, and he had forced his own nephew to do all these horrendous crimes. So they were going for a plea bargain. So in other words, his own lawyer, Brendan's own lawyer, thought he was guilty already. whereas Brendan was saying, hey, look, I made all this up. I'm not guilty. I'm an innocent man. I saw none of this. Len came in with a plan, and same with Michael O'Kelly, and that was to get Brendan to confess. And so the whole point of doing this is that that Brendan would actually spend between 10 to 15 years in prison and then be let out because they do a plea deal. And I bet you there was this incredible shot when Len Kaczynski finally gets thrown out to represent Brendan, that Ken had this really gnarly smirk on his face, thinking, "Oh my God, my right-hand man who's working for the defense is gone." Right? And it's horrendous when your own lawyer is working for the state. So that's the way they approached it. And of course, it was a disaster for everyone, especially for Brendan. Guys, do we have any comments about that?
I do have a comment, a very passionate one.
Yes.
Why was that allowed? How could that be? Couldn't somebody step in? Oh no, of course, these are all rhetorical questions, but it's really infuriating.
Oh, well, once you're on that guide path, once you're on that line of thinking, it now makes sense what Michael O'Kelly actually did. He guided Brendan. He guided him to change his story. And of course, the state ran with it. So in other words, think about this. The defense was providing ammunition for the state to use against their own client. That is I've never seen that before. Neverly, do you have another comment?
Yes, that Michael O'Kelly, the evil himself, he did a systemic destruction of Brendan and Stephen all at once. Remember
correct.
his email that he sent that they're all a part of one branch tree, that it needs to be, what did he say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cut.
Yeah.
To be cut.
Yeah.
To be
and
cut.
That's exactly what he
removed.
did.
Correct. And
that
he
was
had
like a personal vendetta. We don't know why, but
yes. And there was no qualms about that at all. Big Jeff, do you have a comment? Thank you, Neverly.
I do it. It's amplifying Neverly's comment. She specifically asked why was nothing done, and there is a sad answer to that question that we all need to look at very closely. What Michael O'Kelly did was no doubt professional malfeasance. Right? It was illegal and should not have been allowed to happen. Why wasn't he prosecuted? Why wasn't he in jail? Well, let's look to his boss in this case, Len Kaczynski, who should have been sent to jail for parole violations, for continually stalking a court clerk. He was convicted guilty of that. How much time did he end up serving in prison for that?
I don't think he spent any time in prison.
A week or
right,
something.
and that's the difference, and that is the difference, right? If you can afford it, if you are a high profile member of society,
correct,
you're gonna get away with it, right? And that is the sad reality.
Yes. The other. Thank you, Big Jeff. The other important thing here is that Len Kaczynski was not the only person to fall from grace, and we'll talk about this in a minute. Also, Ken Kratz did in a big major way. And you're right, Big Jeff. It goes to show the asymmetric attitude and the asymmetric behavior by the law establishment. They tend to be very lenient on their own because it's a reflection of the entire establishment. If you're sending attorneys to prison for a long period of time, it's going to erode the trust in the law firm, in the whole machinery. So you almost turn a blind eye to it and trivialize the offenses. But quite clearly, what had occurred was that these guys, Kaczynski, O'Kelly, were actually working hand in hand with the state. Bibi, do you have a comment?
Yes, I think it actually goes the other way around. I think by not giving them hard sentences, that it erodes away at our trust and belief in the system.
Yes.
And it also allows them to continue to play dirty ball. If they knew that when they did some of these things that they were going to get put away,
yes,
they wouldn't be so apt to do it. Just like that's supposed to work on everybody else in the world. So
correct.
why doesn't that work on them?
Correct. The standards should apply to everyone equally. It doesn't matter whether you're a judge or just a homeless person on the street. The same constraints, the same laws, and the same procedures should apply to everyone.
And a prosecutor also.
Correct. Correct. Neville, do you have a comment?
Yes, I do. In my personal humble opinion, I think they should be actually held at a higher standard.
Correct, because they are in a position where they're looking after vulnerable people, and their decisions have an impact and an outcome. And clearly for Brendan, who was meant to be under the guidance of Kaczynski and O'Kelly, they were working against him.
Openly.
Correct.
This
correct.
wasn't a big secret or anything. They openly said, yes, O'Kelly said it on the stand. I was working for the state, helping the state.
Correct.
Who does that?
And nobody should. And it's amazing how when Brendan actually put on the pressure to change his attorney, Judge Fox denied it. He actually denied it. Bibi, do you have a comment?
Yeah, well, he may have been paid by the state, but actually they were Brendan's attorneys. So they were technically working for Brendan. It's just that the state was paying them.
Correct. You meant to have proper legal representation. And Lord knows what type of private meetings that Kaczynski, O'Kelly, Kratz were having. I'm sure they were having open discussions on the best way to approach this. And I think Ken Kratz even makes the comment in his book. He says that Brendan should have taken the plea bargain. Is that correct, Christy? Is that what you remember?
Correct. Yes.
Yes.
Everybody did Brendan a great disservice by telling him to go to trial.
Yes, and he actually blamed his grandfather for that. Remember when?
He did, and
yes.
Ken Kratz has recently also released a video, and he pretty much makes it out to be like he was the only one who had Brendan's best interests at heart.
Yeah,
the only one.
That's the sacrificial lamb. I wrote a thesis to Ken Kratz. I replied. I couldn't stand it any longer. And it's remarkable how he's almost saying, well, guys, what else could I do? I had my hands tied. I had to prosecute him. And don't blame me, blame everybody else. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, this is a perfect example that just exemplifies how Kratz and many district attorneys treat this as a game to be won, rather than a true assessment of justice.
Correct. Yeah, it was a disaster from the beginning to the end. There's no question about that. And now everyone is backpedaling, and you can actually see that in Ken Kratz. I think somewhere in his brain, some type of nerve fiber has twitched, and he's realized that what he's done was very, very wrong, very, very bad. And he's trying to now backpedal, and he's giving the excuse, well, guys, it's not my fault. It's Brendan's family, the grandfather. He should have taken the plea. And he even said that had he taken the plea, next year he would have walked. Is that correct, Christy? He would have walked. Next year, 2020, he would have just been a free man.
Well, he would have been eligible for parole. So, yeah,
yes.
Eligible for parole. Parole could have gotten denied. He would have been eligible for parole. But I had something I forgot. I'll come back if I remember. I don't remember what I was going to say. I was going to say something else.
All right. No problems at all. Thank you, guys. All right. So if we have a look at slide 124, things started to change. And that is, Brendan started saying, hey, look, I made all this up. I'm sorry. And he even wrote a letter to the judge. And I remember Len Kaczynski held up the letter to the press and just started to laugh, which is rather remarkable. And it's really sad that when Brendan himself has to tell the judge exactly what his own lawyer should be saying from the beginning. Guys, do we have any comments about that? All right. Okay. So clearly now, Brendan is starting to change his story. He's starting to state, hey, look, I've made all these things up. I'm very, very sorry. And if we have a look at slide 125, well, the judge finally learns that Brendan was interrogated by himself on May the 13th, right? And finally, the judge releases Len Meow Meow Kaczynski as Brendan's attorney, as Brendan's attorney. But guys, I think we all agree the damage has been done, right? The damage has been done. Now, yes, sorry, Big Jeff.
No, just most definitely. I'm just concurring.
Yeah. So you've got this ridiculous situation whereby Brendan, the client in this case, has had a disservice done to him. And then you've got all this backtracking done by the judge and by others, but it's too late. The evidence has been collated, the material has been put forward, the damage is being done, systematically being done. Now, remember, guys, we've got Stephen's trial going on at this particular time, and a remarkable thing took place. Now, remember that Stephen's defense team put forward the notion that the blood in the RAV4 that was found, now we've got to be careful here because no blood was seen in the Pam of God RAV, but blood was seen or found in the RAV4 that was in the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory. And so what Stephen's defense team, they wanted to examine the contents of Stephen's 1985 case file. Guys, do we have any comments about this one? Big Jeff. Oh, sorry.
I'd love to.
We got Patty Scissors Hands. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, the RAV. How many RAVs are there? Which RAV are we talking about?
Let's see, the Pam of God one.
Yes.
The one that's in the crime lab, and the one that's in the Calumet garage. Is that all of them?
Honda or the Laser?
Yeah. To answer your question, Patty, Scissors Hands, we don't know.
Right, exactly.
I wish I could give you an answer, but even I'm confused now. But as Big Jeff said, that's definitely a topic for Thursday. You know, we can talk about the RAVs for hours. But clearly, sorry, Patty.
True that.
Yes, so no doubt we'll discuss that at another time. But it's curious now that the defense team wanted to have a look at the contents of the 1985 case file, and so when they went down there to have a look at the files, the trial. Now remember, the 1985 case file was all about the Penny sexual assault. And what they discovered was all the documents were just thrown together in a box and placed on a filing cabinet. Nothing was secure. If you had a code to get into the office, you can easily walk in and walk out. Now, remember, Stephen's defense, in fact, even Stephen at a very early stage in the investigation said, hey, look, guys, I didn't put the blood there in the RAV. It got planted there. Well, when they went down to the court clerk's office, if we have a look at slide 126, lo and behold, what do they find there? Now, you had Buting, you had Uyghur, and you had Norm Garn all come down to the, I think there was Baez as well. So they all went down to the county clerk's office, and lo and behold, they found a box, a polystyrene box. And you know, guys, where I'm going to go with this, of course. And lo and behold, they did this all in situ. This is exactly what the MTSO investigators should have done from the beginning, in situ, in camera, without touching anything. So they got the polystyrene box, they opened it up. Lo and behold, the evidence tape had been cut on the polystyrene box. Not by them, someone had cut it. So this polystyrene box, when they opened it up, I think there must have been an audible gasp, because inside the polystyrene box, there was a vial of blood, and it had Stephen Avery's name and I think his prison ID number on there. And the blood itself was in liquid form. Now remember, these are purple top tubes. When they collect the blood in the purple top tubes, the blood is collected under vacuum. So therefore, when the blood is collected, the blood is under vacuum seal. No blood should start appearing underneath the purple top. And what they discovered was that there was evidence that the actual stopper itself had been tampered with, right? And so you could imagine the shock and horror of both Uyghur and Garn when they saw the fact that, oh my God, here is a sample of liquid blood in an evidence container that's been cut open and with Stephen Avery's name. And the defense are going with the plan that someone had taken blood from this vial and used it to plant the blood in the RAV. Now, this makes perfect sense, guys. Why? Because you have a vial of blood that you know belongs to Stephen Avery. So therefore, there's no dispute, no argument. You take a swab of that blood, it's going to come up with a DNA profile of Stephen Avery. So you know for sure that that blood belongs to Stephen Avery. Unfortunately, the defense made the big mistake. And that is when they saw the hole in the purple top. They said, oh, the blood has been violated. Someone put in a syringe and they took out the blood, and we spoke to LabCorp and they said, no, we don't do that. All they had to do, guys, was ask a nurse, how do you collect the blood in a purple top? And the answer is, you've got this little device whereby you plunger in the purple top in a needle at one end, and you plunger in the needle in a vein. And because the top is under pressure, vacuum pressure, the blood flows in. So therefore, the defense made this big deal about the little hole in the top. The little hole in the top, guys, is completely normal. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
I do, and you were going there. You can. Would you prefer to finish and then me comment, or would you prefer to have you comment now?
The only thing I want to say, Big Jeff, is that Norm Garn said to Buting, well, isn't this a game changer? So therefore, the state knew then and there, oh my God, there is a source of blood available to plant in the RAV4. Big Jeff.
So file this under how to win an argument against the guilty.
Yes,
it's not necessary to assert that the source of Stephen's blood in the RAV was this particular vial.
Correct.
The point is that there were several sources of Stephen's blood available. For sure, this vial. For sure, as you point out in your excellent presentation, the Grand Dam. For sure, there are probably other samples of his blood taken while he was in prison for God knows what. The fact of the matter is, his blood was available. Stephen very clearly in the recently released phone records is convinced that blood came from his sink when he reopened it, taking off the trailer off of Barb's van prior to going to Menards with Chucky on the Thursday.
Correct.
That may or may not be where the actual blood came from. But there are multiple sources. Now, that being said, I'm also interested in your professional opinion. There's a recent YouTube video that indicated how blood could possibly be rehydrated from sources that were dried out. Do you have any comment on that? I mean, I'm hitting you with your blind, so I apologize.
Yeah. Well, look, there's no doubt. And Big Jeff, I do agree with you. We don't actually have to prove where the blood actually came from. All we know is that there were multiple sources of blood available. And the reconstitution of the blood just simply means that if you've got a dried blood spot, if you place distilled water or maybe a saline solution with the appropriate pH, you can reconstitute the blood. It won't be perfect, but you can get a liquid form of blood. And so remember, in my presentation, I worked out that all you need is around about 300 to 600 microliters. That's less than 1 ml of blood. And in order to seed the RAV4 with the blood, will take approximately 2 minutes, not even with a dropper. All you basically do is you spread the blood and notice the blood was only spread at the front, and there's also a drop of blood on a metal frame. There was none of Stephen's blood that was present in the cargo bay area, where apparently the victim's blood was found as well. So it was done rather quickly, and it could all be done through the driver's side door. All you do is you open the door, you step in with a gloved hand with a dropper, no matter where you got the blood from, and you drop it in. Big Jeff, do you have a comment? So yes, it is. It is very easy.
Yeah.
Big Jeff.
And the threshold is you only have to get it past your girlfriend, Cherie Cohen.
Well, you know. Big Jeff, you know how it is, it's I can't help it. Well, yeah, I know.
That Suckman's a beast, Cherie. You watch out for her. You watch out for Dr. Sil.
I know. Bibi, do you have a quick comment?
Well, and you might not even have to get it past her. She might have even been the one doing the rehydrating. And it's very possible that she could have been doing it right there, leaning over the front seat and spilled the flaked blood, the dried blood on the front floorboard.
Yeah, look, here's the problem, right? There should have not been any blood flakes. That is ridiculous, because it means that the blood itself has coagulated. Now, I understand that carpets can be waterproofed, right? They can be waterproofed, but it's rather bizarre that you're getting both droplets of blood and then flakes. Flakes tend to suggest that the blood in actual fact, had dried out. And so you've got both droplets of blood and flakes in the RAV4, which is very unusual. Bibi, do you have a comment?
Well, and if that's the case, then I would imagine that the whole floor would have been Scotch guarded, and that
including the seats.
It wouldn't have stuck anywhere. It would have been this weird, and I don't even think it would be flakes. I think it would kind of dry on top of.
Yeah. Yes, it would. You would have
in blotches or spots or droplets or whatever.
Yes. What people what you've got to be aware is that they actually didn't have to use Stephen's blood at all. They could have used any blood source, right? So it gives the impression that the RAV4 had blood in it. So you could have got anybody's blood, right? You spread it in the car, And what you do is you give the impression that you're taking all these swabs, you cut out little sections from the seed, and then what you do with those swabs is you throw them all out. Right? And then you substitute swabs that you know contain Stephen Avery's blood. And they had plenty of them. If you look at my presentation, I think they had 27 of them. They had a lot of swabs. So you, first of all, give the impression, hey, look, we've got this blood, we've taken these swabs, we've done DNA testing, it belongs to Stephen Avery. But the reality is they had a ready supply source of blood in the Grand Am. Not only that, they had blood that was present in the trailer and the garage. All Culhane had to do was a DNA test. Run it through the machine, get all the swabs that were positive for blood and positive for Stephen's DNA, and you could do whatever you want. So you've got a box. I now saw what they do. They've got a box where they label what it is. So they'll say item A1, which is the ignition or whatever it is, and all you do is you put the swab in the box. If you don't observe what Culhane did, you can swap any of the swabs with anything else. And the remarkable thing is, the blood that was on the ignition, where the ignition was, that was actually swabbed 3 times, one by Groffey and twice by Culhane. That's very unusual that you take a swab of a blood stain 3 times, right? Because Groffey and Culhane both did a presumptive test for blood. So the way it works is this. You do a presumptive test for blood first using phenolphthalein. If it comes up pink, you know it's blood. So because you know it's blood, you do another swab, fresh swab, and that's what you use for your DNA source. The remarkable thing is this. On the key, the Toyota RAV4 key, on the hood latch, there was no blood. So therefore, what is Culhane or the person who did the swabbing, why are they swabbing nothing? There was no evidence of any blood. So she actually broke her own protocol, and Buting told her, so now sometimes you do a phenolphthalein test and other times you don't. So she actually got caught out by, you look at an object and you want to make sure that there are cells that you can extract DNA from. The sure sign that you can extract DNA from is if there's a little bit of skin, semen, saliva, obvious saliva, or blood. The Toyota RAV4 key was clean. There was nothing on it. The hood latch, there was nothing on it. The battery terminals, there was nothing on it. Lo and behold, we get a swab from the hood latch and we get a swab of the Toyota RAV4 key, and they both contain a source of DNA, which is remarkable. So it's obvious that they didn't have Steve Avery's blood available to put on the key or the hood latch, because remember, the hood latch came much, much later, whereas the key came fairly early on. Right? So you can see what their planting scenario was. Their intentions were plant the blood, get a result straight away, publicize it. Patty, scissors hands, do you have a comment?
Yeah, the amount of DNA they found was like above and beyond what a person would have left had they touched it.
Oh, no question about that. And you see, they never had any control over that, because if they're setting up a crime scene, they're not going to dilute out the DNA and say, a person will only leave 2 nanograms of DNA. No. Their aim was, plant it, and we'll deal with it afterwards.
I think they swapped
Patty.
swabs. Yeah, I think they swapped swabs,
very,
right?
very, very easy. Very easy, Patty. No question about that. Christy, do you have a comment?
Well, I mean, Sherry Culhane said it. Stephen was a good shedder. That's why there was so much DNA.
Correct.
He was a good shedder.
Yes. So what's happening here, guys? It's pretty obvious. They're coming up with every excuse under the sun to account for anomalies. oh, how come you extracted 10 times more DNA than one would normally find? Oh, he's a good shedder.
Yeah,
Right?
and
He's a good he's a good
you're
shedder.
the DNA guy. Correct me if
Yeah.
I'm wrong. Isn't the whole good shedder thing a complete hoax? There's no such.
It's all
Is that
bullshit.
true? Thank you. You
If I
said it.
if
I
I'm
just wanted to make sure.
if I'm permitted to say that, guys,
You are.
look, we all shed. All of us, we all shed. We can't control how much hair we lose, how much skin we lose, unless you've got a genetic disorder where you're losing a phenomenal amount of skin, a phenomenal amount of hair, or you salivate at huge levels. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
Well, again, following up with Christy, I believe Cherie said on the stand that there have been several papers written
Yes.
about the fact that a good shedder will actually mask the other DNA, which is
Oh
why
my
only his
Lord.
DNA. I wonder if
That's
you
right.
could,
I forgot.
maybe post some of those papers for us so that we can read them.
Yeah, I got
Do they exist?
well, it's sort of like, it's funny because they counteracted that argument because other researchers had done other pieces of work. And of course, Cherie never read them. So she had no idea. But sorry, Bibi, do you have a comment?
Just, I think of a Saint Bernard during springtime, a good shedder.
A good yes. Well, of course, what Kathleen Zellner did, she did the experiments herself, right? And she's got her own DNA experts. And they looked at all this sort of like, okay, let's have a look at if someone touches the hood latch. Let's have a look at how much DNA will actually be left behind. And what they found was two things. It's very difficult to leave behind any DNA on a hood latch, right? Very difficult to leave any DNA. Only a small proportion of her subjects had left any DNA. Point number two, the amount of DNA they left was tiny, very, very small amount. Whereas the amount of DNA that was left on the hood latch was huge. And I think Paddy Scissors Hands made the comment that all you do is you swap the swabs, right? That's all you've got to do. And don't forget, if you've got a source of Stephen's DNA, when you extract the DNA from blood from a buccal swab, you've got literally thousands of micrograms of DNA in a tube. All you do is you dilute it out and you can contaminate any swab you want. So remember, the defense wanted to go and observe Culhane. Remember this? During MAM, they wanted to go and observe her do the DNA testing. They said, now wait for it, you can't come in this lab. You know why? Because you're going to contaminate things. And lo and behold, who contaminates the DNA but Culhane herself, right? So look, quite clearly, with DNA, you can manipulate anything you want. And I think Big Jeff is going to make the comment about what Couchet said. Big Jeff, you want to make a comment? What did Jean Couchet say? What did he say?
Can DNA evidence be fabricated? Yes, it can.
Yeah.
Was it in this case? I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know. Well, yeah. So, guys, put it this way. Look, I've worked in a molecular biology laboratory for many, many years. I have extracted DNA from blood. I know how much DNA you get from blood. It's a huge amount of DNA. I've done molecular gene cloning, sequencing. I've done the whole lot. And it is very, very easy to contaminate your sources of DNA. No question. Let me tell you how it is. I'll say a little quick story. When I was doing my postdoctoral research in a laboratory, there was about 4 or 5 molecular biologists who all worked in the same area. And we used to clone genes and sequence them. And the running joke was, make sure you check the DNA data bank of what everyone else is working with in the lab because you're going to clone their DNA by mistake. And let me tell you, DNA in a solution forms an aerosol, like a little mini spray, and it gets everywhere. Microspray. So you're working on a gene, let's call it gene A. When you do your results, you end up with a gene B that you've never seen before, never worked before. It's because a bit of DNA landed on your equipment and you happen to clone that piece of DNA by mistake. Guys, that's the same with a PCR. PCR is a polymerase chain reaction. It's so sensitive. All you need is one skin cell, one blood cell, one hair, and you clone that. You amplify up that DNA instead of what you're meant to. So it's extremely sensitive technique. Big Jeff.
I think probably the most important thing that I ever learned from one of your presentations was the reason why it is typical that when somebody files for a deviation,
Yes.
that deviation. So what is the reason why the typical policy of the lab was that if the victim's DNA is found or somebody's DNA is found, that you have to throw the whole thing out. And it all boils down to what you're just getting into is because she was dealing with Teresa's DNA. It could have gotten there by accident. That's the reason why you have to throw it all out, right?
Absolutely. What is disturbing, which I found out later on, was that Sharika Hain had kept all the swabs in her own personal cupboard for, I believe, 4 months. Right? Let's get that again. She kept all the swabs in her own personal cupboard at her bench, which means that the potential for contamination of samples is huge. She then gave those swabs to the storage area after, I think, about 4 or 5 months. And no one said a word because no one understood the implications. So therefore, if you keep swabs out of the storage area and you're going continuously to that cupboard and you're working on the bench, the potential for cross-contamination is huge. And what Big Jeff alluded to was this. If you do an experiment and you have controls, if your control is contaminated with your DNA or a DNA from another source, what you do is you throw everything out. You record it and you start again. You never file a deviation of request form because you have contamination. If you have contamination, you can't actually prove that Teresa Halbach's DNA, which was present in item FL, got there because it was on the bullet or because you put it there by cross-contamination. Therefore, the entire result had to be thrown out. And guys, we'll talk about this in a second. But, we can talk about DNA for hours. I love that subject. But yes, only a person, I have this argument with guilters all the time. The first question I ask is, are you a molecular biologist? Yes or no? Secondly, have you worked with DNA? Have you cloned something? Have you extracted it? Have you done a PCR? Everyone says no. No, they haven't. I then say, see you later. Because if you haven't worked with the material, you have no idea how promiscuous it actually is. Once you aerosolize the DNA, right? Once it's in a spray, once it's in a liquid, it gets everywhere. You'll be surprised at how it can end up anywhere. So when people do swabs, of a bench area, a workbench area, that's when all the DNA, bacteria, fungi are discovered because it is everywhere. Despite them cleaning the benches, you can still get cross-contamination. Well, guys, if we have a look, because I'm sort of like looking at the time, and if we look at slide 127, well, did this put the cat amongst the pigeon, right? Now, remember, the state were thinking, nah, no way. Where are they going to get this DNA or blood from? Well, lo and behold, there's the blood vial. exactly as the defense were putting their case. Stephen said, hey, somebody got my blood. They got a lot of blood out of me. Well, what does the state do? They want to suppress the blood vial evidence. Can you believe that? That proved to me they were so worried about that blood, they had to go and suppress it. Well, thank God, Judge Willis says, no, sorry, we're not going to suppress this evidence. Now, guys, do we have a quick comment about that? A BB?
No, I guess not.
Okay. Big Jeff.
Sorry about my dog. This is a game, not a quest for justice, right?
Yes.
If this were a quest for justice, you do not exclude potentially exculpatory evidence.
That is correct. But you see, Big Jeff, sorry, Neverly, do you have a comment?
Just to tag on to Big Jeff's comment, yes, this wasn't a quest for justice. This was a mission for a conviction.
No doubt about that. Correct. So, when the defense puts forward the notion, hey, look, this is where they got the blood from, the state panicked. The state thought, there is a source of DNA, there is a source of blood that could be obtained. And of course, and we'll see later on, guess who had access to that blood vial? BB, do you have a comment?
Yeah, well, and also the styrofoam container on that not only was cut, but it wasn't resealed properly, so it was entered improperly, because normally if they opened it, it would be retagged and retaped with the proper tape. Instead, it was held together with just some pieces of Scotch tape. Yeah.
Yes, correct. Yeah, whenever you go inside a piece of evidence, you date it, sign it, and you reseal it with evidence tape. So therefore, a person looking at that piece of evidence knows who had access to it. And guys, would anyone like to guess who had access to that blood vial? Anybody want to have a guess? Starts with a L. Christy.
Link did. He had the keys to was it the clerk's evidence room?
Yeah.
Yes. Link had keys to, and Link's name all over it too. Somewhere, somehow.
Oh yeah, it's on a document.
But he's not involved.
No, of course he's not involved. He's not involved. Now,
I'm going to see here.
Yes. Now, if you're an officer, a law enforcement, is a secretary or anyone else in that office going to question you for going into that room where the evidence is? Of course not. So Lenk, who is involved in the finding of the key and in the garage, the bullet, well, he had access to that blood. Christy.
That's what I was just going to say. Wait a minute. The key, the blood, the RAV.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah. Yes, and you could also pattern match Colburn as well. So those two guys, Colburn and Lenk, they were everywhere, right? And don't forget, Colburn was the one who had a personal camera who took pictures everywhere. And I would love to get access to those photographs. It'll be amazing what's in his camera, what he actually captured. So guys, let's progress a little bit here. We're looking at slide 127. Well, the judge overturned the suppression of that blood vial evidence. You can see on the top of that blood vial that there is blood around the rim. That is excellent evidence that someone pulled off the top. So air got inside the vacuum container. So those tubes hold about 10 mils of blood. When the FBI measured the volume, they found that the blood vial contained 5.5 mils of blood. So a lot of blood was taken out or removed from that blood vial. Now, I don't know how much blood originally was in there, but it definitely would have been more than 5.5 mils. So someone took blood out. Because the blood has got EDTA in it, you can easily keep it in a little tube and store it somewhere else. No problems. That's very easy to do. So guys, if I could just finish slide 127. All right. So what the state wanted to do now is to ask the FBI to do a chemical test. And that is, they wanted to determine whether EDTA was present on those blood swabs that were taken from the Toyota RAV4. Now, you've got to understand this. The FBI don't have an EDTA test. Right? There is no such thing as an EDTA test. And an EDTA test, which is the anticoagulant, is very, very dodgy for a start. And it got the FBI in a lot of trouble with the O.J. Simpson trial. Okay? So because of some technicality, the defense used it against the state, and OJ got released because of the planting scenario. Because in that case, they did find traces of EDTA and said, okay, you planted the blood, my client is innocent. Of course, years later, what they discovered was the EDTA didn't get properly washed out of the machine. So it carried on. And because there were trace amounts of the EDTA, their results were contaminated with the EDTA. Well, the FBI never did those tests again. Lo and behold, what did the state request? The state asked the FBI to develop a new test to test the blood in the RAV4. And I remember Attorney Fallon got up and he said it very distinctively in court regarding the planting scenario. And Fallon said they do so at their peril. Right? He looks like a guy straight from Star Wars. Big Jeff, you want to comment on that?
I do. I think I think that I have a complaint department. I know BB's the Discord complaint department. He's always using the wrong picture.
Yes.
Zoe should be using the picture that I identified for Fallon.
Yes, for sure. So the state were trying to have it both ways. The state was saying, we want to suppress the blood vial evidence. Oh, we can't? All right, we want to test it. And of course, we'll talk about the blood vial results a little bit later on. But clearly, the FBI had to develop this new test, and they had to do it really, really fast. But there are ways that you can fool the FBI as well. If you've got one lab tech that is crooked, that can easily be manipulated, it's very, very easy to fool the FBI. All right, guys, let's move on a little bit. We'll continue a little bit more, then we'll put a close to the proceedings. Now, if we have a look at slide 128. Now, the state, they had a big dilemma, right? They had a real big dilemma. They didn't know whether they were going to call Brendan up in the Steve Avery trial, because Brendan now was starting to recant his testimony. Brendan clearly was a shocking witness. And of course, he was a bad witness because he never witnessed anything, right? So the defense wanted to know, are you going to call Brendan up, yes or no? So the state, believe it or not, and I'll read it out, agrees to dismiss 2 of the 3 charges that were added after Brendan's arrest. Now remember, when Brendan gave his confession, Ken Kratz decided to add 3 more charges on Stephen's account. Sexual assault, kidnapping, and I believe the other one was false imprisonment. So now, when Stephen was going into trial, they dropped 2 of them. Now remember, for life in prison, they only had to prove 1 charge, right? Whereas with the defense, they had to dismiss all of the charges. So the defense had a much harder time to prove their client innocent. Guys, do we have any comments about that? Big Jeff.
Mutilation of a corpse was a charge.
Yes, it was. And we'll discover later on that Stephen wasn't convicted of mutilation of a corpse, but Brendan was. So you've got the one victim, both of them together, and they sort of like distributed the charges amongst Brendan and Stephen. It was completely bizarre. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
But the question is, how would you even prove sexual assault? Well, the forensic evidence did not exist to prove it, right? I mean, if there were semen found somewhere, or her biological fluids found somewhere, perhaps on his mattress, they could have proved it, right?
Correct.
But there was insufficient forensic evidence available to prove it.
Correct. BB, do you have a comment?
In fact, that mattress was clean enough that the officers felt confident enough to sit there and fill out their forms while they were searching.
That is correct. Yes. Just to echo Big Jeff, there was no forensic evidence of Teresa Halbach being inside the trailer or the garage. Full stop. None. So where this sexual assault kidnapping charge came from was from Brendan's coerced confession. So the state had to make a decision. Do we call Brendan up or not? And in the end, they did not. So guys, let's progress and have a look at slide 129. I reckon we'll go for one or two more slides, because some of these we can talk literally for hours. All right, so let's have a look at slide 129. This is very, very telling. Here we have both Karen Halbach and her husband sitting in the dock in the trial, almost emotionless, right? Almost emotionless. And down below them, we have the Halbach family. Again, blank stares, just listening on. And on the right-hand side, we have the Dassey Avery family listening on intently with what is going on. You can see the physical contrast between the people involved in this trial. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
I do. Very recently, Paul Capaldi put up a video, and that the gist of that video was the Halbach family more than once referred to Teresa in the past tense. Mike Halbach said the grieving process was going to take days, maybe weeks. What did he mean by that?
Are you talking about?
Please have an explanation.
You're talking about the grieving. You're talking about the grieving process.
Exactly correct. Yes.
That was one of the most bizarre comments I have ever heard from a brother. As in, it's all done, finished. They haven't even started the trial yet. We're going to grieve. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Look, guys, I'll disclose this. It's personal for me. I lost my wife, my dear wife, to cancer 6 years ago. 6 years ago. I'm still grieving today. And for a brother to say, oh, well, the grieving process, it would last a day, a week, or whatever. Very, very bizarre comment from a brother. Chrissy, do we have a comment?
We've said this before in other podcasts. I know people grieve differently, and people grief looks different on you than it looks on me, than it looks on Jeff. It looks different on all of us. But as a mother of four, and only the biological mother of one of those children, if anything like this had happened to any one of my four children, I just don't see myself being able to behave the way Karen is. The rest of the family, okay, but that woman carried that girl in her body for 9 months. It's
Yes.
different for mothers, and her
Yes.
lack of reaction bothers me the absolute.
Well, I know what BB's gonna say. BB, do you have a comment?
My head's exploding right now, but yeah, Mike says many bizarre things.
Yes.
Mike repeatedly says bizarre things.
Yes, he does.
And I lost my son 13 years ago.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear
The
that.
anniversary being on Halloween.
Yes.
And I was destroyed for a very long time afterwards.
Yeah.
My family was very destroyed.
Yes.
And he committed suicide. He wasn't raped, tortured, stud, and burnt. And then the body withheld from us for
Yes.
6 or so years, or
Yeah.
whatever it was. So I
Yeah.
don't get it.
Yeah.
Coupled with what Mike says, it's
Yes.
just, it makes no sense.
Yes. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
I do. It's a very delicate situation to balance when we do have a grieving family and a heinous crime here.
Of course.
But there is precedent. There was a case in the UK. Forgive me for not knowing the name of the case in the UK, where
Yes.
the actual killers were identified, and they happen to be the relatives of the victims, because the parents, or because the interviewees on television referred to the possible victims in the past tense. And that was enough for the press to alert the investigators to the fact that this had happened. Why are they referring to the victim in the past tense here when it's still a missing person? There is legal precedent for this. I apologize for pointing out legal precedent, because it is that sensitive balance. But Mike Halbach referred to her in the past tense, and this Day's comment, from the testimony we just heard from you, from BB, who've actually lost people, and it's still after years and years. It's crazy.
It's completely mind blowing, and what I find here, when I look at Karen and her husband, they have a form of detachment. The whole family has got this weird detachment. And as Christy pointed out, as a grieving mother, you would be distraught. You'd be in pieces. Very few tears were shed by them. And that's what really worries me and concerns me a lot. Bibi, do you have a comment?
I also have a huge problem with the older of the two younger sisters. When she's on the stand, she's really okay. The whole time she's on the stand and talking and holding the key and shopping with the cops and
the whole thing is completely, utterly surreal and bizarre. The families behave very differently, but what is consistent is this: Stephen Avery is always crying. Stephen Avery openly admits and says, "I feel sorry for the Halbach family." Even Brendan says, "I know what it's like to lose someone you love." The two people that are sitting in prison are the two that cried all the time and felt sorry for everyone, whereas the Halbach family were very resolute, very united, and emotionless, which was really, really bizarre. So, guys, I like to do one more slide, and then I think we'll call it quits, because we've hit 2 hours. But here's something I want to. I know. Every time we say we're going to do an hour, we never do. But guys, here's one important point I like to highlight. This is in slide 129. This is the way Ken Kratz works. Ken Kratz, I believe, adopted the role of father. He adopted the role of being Teresa's father. And you can tell that whenever he talked about Teresa and even let slip this little girl right? And it's sort of like, what? Whoa! And he corrected himself. No, this young lady, whatever. His voice changed. His demeanor changed. He had a falsetto voice. He became very emotional. And every time he referred to Stephen, he was pointing the finger. He was pointing the finger. And if you have a look at this diagram, it says a lot. Look at the way he portrays Teresa. Wholesome, beautiful, smiling, loving, caring, nurturing. And look at Steve. Look, of all the pictures they could have used, have a look at him, And so this is the whole idea of making a murderer. They were painting a picture. They were showing you the contrast right from the get-go. Bibi, do you have a comment?
Just one quick one. Father or Big Daddy?
Yeah. Look, again, we can spend a couple of hours on that as well, because now that we know what's happened, now that we know the fallout, and now that we know Ken Kratz's personality that's in his DNA, right? We got to understand that this was a man who was addicted to narcotics, addicted to sex, and addicted because of his personality, because of his narcissism. When you watch Ma'am now, when you read the testimonies and you put that in the back of your mind, it all now makes perfect sense. So he was projecting his own hatred towards Stephen. And Christy will back me up in this. The way if you read his book, you can see that he was jealous of Stephen. Christy, would you like to make a comment about that?
He was very jealous, Steve, and I would almost compare it to he's almost like a scorned lover. Not that just there was a hate. It was a personal hatred and jealousy. Like Stephen had somehow wronged Ken Kratz at some point in time, and this was
yes.
And to my knowledge, they never crossed paths. So I don't believe that he had a reason to hate Stephen.
Yes, he didn't like Stephen for the fact that he had become a media star and he had become a known person in the community. Christy, do you have a comment?
Right. His hatred was of his own narcissism. His hatred for Stephen was born of his own narcissism.
Correct.
There was no valid for him to hate Stephen.
Correct. So in a way, it was a disaster that he was the prosecuting attorney for the state, because it got personal. And so you could see the way they portrayed Stephen. They tried to make him out as a cold blood. And if you notice, Fassbender, Uyghur, Fallon, Gahn, and also Kratz, the words that they use to describe Stephen are all the same. They've obviously come together as a unified approach. Cold-blooded, killer, rapist, torturer, all these nasty connotations, because what they were doing is, in effect, making a murderer. And it obviously worked. So, guys, I'd like to finish because I know that slide 130 I can spend a couple of days on. But think about this. You've got the whole Halbach family sitting there. And in comes, I'm not sure who held the box. I think it could have been Uyghur. In comes a box, and it's got your daughter's cremains in there. Your daughter is literally in front of you. Christy, do you have a comment?
Thinking about that being my daughter in that box is going to bring tears to my eyes. You would have had to carry me out of there at this moment.
Well, it just so happened, Christy, that the camera people focused on Karen and her husband. And see that picture there?
That's the picture from when the bones came in.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
you would have
Yep.
seen me on the floor. People would have been standing up to come
You,
help me.
yeah.
There's
If
just
I
no way.
if I was the parent, I would have been leaping out of the dock and lunging for Stephen Avery. Lunging, they would have had to carry me out of the courtroom. To think that this man allegedly converted his beautiful daughter, which they just showed a picture of, to cremains and fragmented bones. And yet, not one of them blinked, not one of them shed a tear. None of them. They just stood there like granite, Big Jeff.
I would also have a problem. That's the best you can do is throw them in a goddamn box.
Oh, shocking.
Is there any respect at all?
No, none
Ziploc
whatsoever.
baggies too inside the box.
Yes, correct. And imagine, Neverly, do you have a comment?
Yeah, it's really just a personal observation that how Ken Kratz and the prosecution that all use the Halbach for anything that was pertinent, any pertinent questions, they would just jump back on that. Well, out of respect for the Halbachs and their loss and whatnot, and then they plop
Yes,
a box with these bones
yes.
just like
Oh,
that.
correct.
Just
And
it tells you that it was all a show, basically.
yes, it
And that
was. It was. It was a well orchestrated show, and the whole idea was to shock.
very disrespectful. Yes.
Yes, it was. It was done deliberately to shock and awe the judge and the jury. And you could tell. You could tell because when the jury stood up, when the people stood up, the looks on people's faces said it all. It was of shock and horror. Oh my God. The way they imagine, they brought in a box and plonked it on the table. There's your daughter in pieces. And this man here is responsible for doing all of this. How do you come back from that? How do you possibly come back from that? And to make matters worse, if we have a look at the bone on the right-hand side, the way Ken Kratz described it, this is the shin bone, the tibia. This belonged to Teresa Halbach, the daughter of, who did this, who did that. And it just amplified the horrendous nature of this crime. How can Stephen possibly come back from something like that? Right? And that's the whole idea, is making a murderer, making him look phenomenally bad by plonking these cremains on a table. Neverly, do you have a comment?
Yes, all of that, what you said, and in conjunction that they use the media, the press,
Yes.
to help him make the murderer out of Stephen. Because
Correct.
at that time, if you watch episode 4,
Yes.
I don't know who they were interviewing, but the lady from the newscast, she said the competition is fierce. We got to do what we got to do. And right now, murder is hot. It sells.
Yeah, that's
How
correct.
insensitive, how callous. Oof.
Yes, I think, look, we went through a period of time, and I can make this comment in Australia too. At around about that time, anything to do with death, murder, mutilation was everyone used to watch on TV, all the crime shows. The worse, the better. And they treated this as a circus. The media treated it as a circus. And you could tell because every time the Halbach family came out, no one was near them. Every time the Dassey and Avery family came out, they had 20 cameras around them. So they paid the respect to the Halbach family and left them alone, but they invaded the privacy. They shoved microphones, cameras, you know, at the Avery and Dassey family. They had nowhere to go. It was like you said, Neverly, it was murder was hot. And the more publicity they got, the better, which was a terrible, terrible thing. Don't worry, in Australia, we've had similar cases where people have been wrongfully convicted, but they were judged in the media. And as a consequence of that, people went to prison. Then, years later, when somebody else looked at the forensic evidence, they found that the forensic evidence was fatally flawed, and they eventually got released. But clearly, Brendan and Stephen were judged in the media. So, guys, I like to finish it here because we can spend no, there's some really good stuff coming up. I just want to make a couple of comments about the bones. First of all, those cremains are all fragmented. They're all small bone fragments. Now, two people looked at those bones. Dr. Bennett looked at those bones before Dr. Eisenberg did. Dr. Eisenberg was the state's forensic anthropologist. Dr. Bennett examined those bones. Now, I want to show you in situ photographs of where the bones were found, but I can't. But I can't because there's none. Right? What the state did was they took the coroner, they prevented the coroner from coming on site. So therefore, we don't have a coroner who's carefully going over the bones, where they were found. So apparently those bones, those human cremains, were found in Stephen Avery's burn pit. Stephen Avery's burn pit was about the size of a table. So it's actually quite small. And believe it or not, they actually used an end loader to dig up the dirt and put it in a pile and then sift through the pile to look for bones. So they actually used heavy equipment to get the bones out. What was discovered was that there were bones found on the grass. They were everywhere, right? So we don't know where the bones in that box came from. But here's a few comments. 1, all the bones are fragmented. 2, all the bones ever collected only come from one individual. There were no duplicate bones. 3, there were no intact bones. In other words, if you look at the bones in your arm, in your legs, your ribs, there were no long bones found. They were all fragmented, all in pieces. And it just so happens that the bones looked exactly like you get from a crematorium. So the victim was burnt at very, very high crematorium levels. Kathleen Zellner's experts have shown that there's no way a human body will be converted to these fragments in an open burn pit. It's not hot enough, right? The temperature is simply not hot enough. But here's the point I want to make. Dr. Bennett examined the bones and he found a pelvic bone fragment. From that pelvic bone fragment, he was able to ascertain that the victim was an adult human female, right? Just by looking at the pelvic bone. And then a day later or 2 days later, the bones were examined by Dr. Leslie Eisenberg. Dr. Eisenberg concluded that they had come from a female, but she didn't use the pelvic bone, completely avoided it. She used other, they're called diagnostic bones. She used the eyebrow, the bone above where the eyebrow is, to look at the ridge. And so hence she was able to determine that it was from a female, because the ridge above your eyebrow is different in a male compared to a female. But interestingly, Dr. Eisenberg never used the same diagnostic bone that Bennett did, which is rather bizarre. She, in fact, avoided talking about the pelvic bones, and we all know why, of course. My final comment is this. Item BZ is the bone on the right-hand side. Of all the bones, it just so happened to have a little bit of burnt muscle tissue. And from that muscle tissue, Culhane was able to extract a little bit of DNA and only 7 loci came up as a match, but they were 100% match to the pap smear that apparently came from Teresa Halbach. Yes, I know what BB, do you have a comment?
Actually, I'm not going to go there. Eisenberg had just screwed things up really bad in the Christine Rudy case.
Correct. Correct.
And said that chicken bones that were in the fire pit were the fetus. And then later, when they found the torso in the springtime, the fetus was still intact.
Yes. Now, you must admit, though, this is bizarre. Completely bizarre, because you had this almost the same team working on the Christine Rudy case that was working on the Teresa Halbach case. And with Christine Rudy, if our listeners can remember, she was also shot in the head, cut up, burnt, and her body was disposed in multiple locations. Lo and behold, with Teresa Halbach, or the victim appeared to have been shot twice in the skull, body burnt, fragmented, cut up to pieces, and dispersed. So the MO of the death of Christine Rudy is almost a pattern match with what happened to Teresa Halbach, which is remarkable. And in both cases, it's Eisenberg who was examining the cremains and the body parts. And as Bibi alluded to, Eisenberg made a huge mistake when she examined the bones in the burn pile for the Christine Rudy case. She said, oh yeah, they're fetal bones, human fetal bones. Well, it just happened to be animal bones. And the fetus, the intact fetus, was still in the belly of the torso. So that was a huge embarrassment, right? So now that explains why Eisenberg was very, very cautious in the Teresa Halbach case and refused to identify bones at the Manitowoc County gravel pit as human. Bibi, do you have a comment?
And they're both like 14 days apart and only a few counties apart.
Phenomenal. We had 3 deaths of 3 women within 12 days.
In the same age group.
Yep. Oh, yeah. In the same age group. But again, guys, that's a podcast for Thursday, I think. Anyway, guys, just to conclude. So this box of bones was placed on a table in front of the Halbachs, and not one of them winched. Not one of them showed any emotions, nothing. And I know everyone grieves, but by God, that's about as bad as you can get. So whoever killed Teresa Halbach, or the victim, clearly did not want any forensic evidence or identity of the victim to be known. By a miracle of God, a little bit of tissue was left on a bone, and that DNA came back as being 100% match to the pap smear of Teresa Halbach. Now, yes, there was a gentleman's agreement, and yes, it was Fassbender who obtained that pap smear sample from a hospital. So they all agreed upon it. It was a gentleman's agreement that I haven't seen any paperwork at all. So,
yeah,
guys,
it was a gentleman's agreement because there was no paperwork, Sean.
There you go.
And there weren't any gentlemen.
Yep. Yep, guys. I can't disagree with you there. But clearly, we can talk about the bones for several hours because they are central to this case. And guys, the thing is, DNA is the central issue here. The DNA evidence is so critical. All right, guys, I think we better leave it there. Do we have any final quick comments from our panel? Big Jeff.
Yeah. Again, our motivation should be to win arguments against the guilters. Yes. The behavior of the Halbachs is not out of bounds. Please, It's been used as precedent for legal investigations in the past. If you want to
Yes.
have an idea, albeit it might be biased, Stephen and Dolores on the recently released telephone calls,
Yes.
they talk a lot about there's just a lack of emotion with those people. I find
Yes.
Dolores Avery probably to be the most genuine person in the whole clan. And she said
Yes.
none of them are crying, and that none of them are even seem disturbed. And oh, by the way, they're referring to him in the past tense.
Yes.
So being my comment.
Yes, and also so early on as well, and
So
so
early
early
on.
on. Yes, Christy, do you have a comment?
Thank you.
No, pleasure, Christy.
I did, but Jeff talked too long and I forgot what it was.
That's the risk. That's the risk all the time. Let me go first.
I should know better.
Okay, Neville, do you have a comment?
No, I just want to thank you all for inviting me.
It's
I
been a
got over
pleasure.
my nervousness.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Thank
you.
you very much. Patty Scissors Hands, do you have a comment?
I just think this is great. I thank you for having me be part of this. I love this because it helps with my obsession. And thanks for including me. And
A pleasure.
thanks. Have a good night,
A pleasure.
guys.
Thank you very much. Now, Lily and Sammy, do we have any outstanding questions from our listeners?
I don't believe we do. We've kind of addressed some in here that kind of went astray, but they very quickly were right on top of what was being discussed. So everything came out kind of naturally. So, but I want to thank everyone for joining us. I absolutely love the conversation and the topics, and far as the questioning that does come up, people are thinking and they're listening and they're learning.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I mean, for me personally, a revisitation has taught me a lot. I thought I knew the case, but I really didn't, not at a deep understanding. Having gone through MAM 1, literally frame by frame, I learned so much more. And I like to tell our listeners that, oh boy, we got some good stuff coming up. And as you can see, we are discussing the forensic evidence at a detailed level. And the important thing, guys, on Foul Play, we've done a lot of video presentations and podcasts on the forensic evidence at a very deep level. And I urge you guys, if you're interested, please have a look at some of them. You'll find them very, very interesting. Christy, do you have a comment?
I was going to thank everybody for coming. I also wanted to thank all the new subscribers that we got this week.
Yes.
Joining us for from listening to the calls. It's great. We love it. I really want to say that I love what we're doing here. I love how we're going through Making a Murderer, scene by scene. You've done a great job with the slides. And like you said, I thought I knew a case until a month ago when I started really hanging out with you guys a little bit more. And I have learned more in the last month. I think I learned in the last year, and it's just really been a pleasure. And don't forget about Thursdays. Thursdays is going to be fun. Thursdays are going to be fun.
Yes, for sure. Big Jeff, do you have a quick comment?
Just quickly to highlight, to amplify what Christy said, there is so much independent research. You're going to hear so much. You hear so much from this podcast that goes beyond what you heard in Man. The Guilters will continue to say that it was a TV show that fooled 20 million people. I've got bad news for the Guilters, don't I? There's a lot of so much independent research that is corroborating the innocence of these two.
Yes, and the other thing, of course, is that there are corrupt crime lab techs, right? I did a video presentation in which Kofod was the guy that planted blood in a car, right? Blood in a car. Just think about that, because that's exactly what we got here. He planted blood in a car from a person that had nothing to do with the crime. right? And as a consequence of planting that blood, these guys ended up in prison until the real killers confessed. And oh my God. So, yes, look, there are corrupt lab techs, and we must never forget what Fassbender said to Cherie Cohen. Tried to put her in his garage or house or trailer. That immediately tells you the way they were guiding the lab tech, the results, right? And if everything is channeled through one person, and it was, anything can go. Bibi, do you have a quick comment?
Oh, I just want to say thank everybody and tell them to enjoy their weekend.
Beautiful. And thank you guys for deciding to do this podcast in the morning for me. It's a beautiful morning. And I want to thank all of our esteemed panel for joining us today, for their insight, their comments. And guys, the important thing to realize here is that we take it casual, but it is very much a team approach. Everyone has got their areas of expertise, what they enjoy doing, and it really highlights the coming together of a lot of independent. We're all different. We think differently, and it really helps, I believe, the case and the understanding of the case. We're now looking at this case at a much deeper level, and we're doing it chronologically, and there's a lot of good stuff coming up, that is for sure. Guys, I'd like to thank our listening audience. I hope that you've enjoyed our podcast and that it is stimulating for you. Please, guys, again, check our podcast on our channel. Please subscribe if you enjoy. Give us the feedback. We understand that we're not going to be able to answer everyone's questions immediately, but we'll try our best. Again, guys, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, guys. We'll catch you all next week to do it again.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now.